In light of the sudden and rampant popularity of anime in our culture, I can't help but feel as though there's something being lost in the flash sensationalism in the latest blockbuster anime. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy chatty lumps of muscle slinging meat at each other as much as the next liberal arts major, but I can't help but long for a time when anime had depth and meaning. Berserk, Code Geass, Fullmetal Alchemist, Hunter x Hunter. Like the rest of you, I spent much of the last, few years now, locked in my basement. No, just me. Well, in either case, with this newfound free time and with no work or school to speak of, I caught up on the latest hits. Black Clover, Fire Force, Kotetsu no Aiba, or as I affectionately refer to it, Berserk for the mentally feeble. But I'm not here to dunk on Demon Slayer fans. Sure, these shows were a great watch. Fire Force is a visual spectacle with great mysteries, interesting concepts, and Demon Slayer and JJK are easily some of the most aesthetically pleasing and stylish animes I've ever seen. But at the end of both of these series' initial run, I didn't feel like I had gained anything from it. I didn't feel like I had consumed someone's art, someone's vision. So instead, I went and broke open some of my anime lists from 2015 and just picked one at random. And I could not have been more pleased with what I had landed on. Which, if you read the title, you already know what it is. Psycho Pass. Now, obviously, there are spoilers ahead. If you would rather watch the show first and come back to this, do so now, because I'm going to spoil this worse than the middle-aged man does your ex-girlfriend. But like your ex, let's just get into it. Yeah, that joke's been recycled. Just like your ex. Anyways, let's move on. Just like... I'm going to spend a fair bit of time on the first episode because, really, it's just a perfect introduction. It gives us so much information that is relevant to the series without excessive exposition or bogging us down with difficult or complex ideas that we need to remember for everything to make sense. Yet it rewards us for paying attention at the exact same time. It really is easily the best first episode in any series I've ever seen, period. That includes live-action series like Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, or even The Sopranos. So this series is set in a post-utopian Japan, where crime is basically all but non-existent, and free will is a thing long since left in the past. But we'll get to that later. The series opens with our secondary protagonist, Kogami, chasing a perp wielding a buzzsaw through an abandoned skyscraper before ultimately catching and summarily executing him. All the while, a white-haired man, Shogo Makishima, watches from high above, and our lead protagonist, Akane, comes in for narration, stating, "They must have realized from the moment they first laid eyes on each other, realized that long before they'd ever met, destiny had planned this encounter. They were not two ships passing in the night. They understood each other better than they understood themselves. Their focus was solely reserved for one another." Which in hindsight, if you look past the homoerotic implications, is kind of a great opening sequence. Or makes it better, depending on your batting preferences. Anyways, this scene introduces us to our primary antagonist and his methods in just a brief flash before allocating him right back into the shadows. Kogami is introduced as a seasoned veteran on the force who does his job without hesitation or remorse. Meanwhile, for our primary protagonist of the series, Akane, it's her first day on the job, and there's no kiddie pool for her to test her toes in. She's thrown straight in with the sharks. The team, composed of latent criminals and police, is in hot pursuit of a future criminal. He's not a murderer or a burglar, an arsonist. What's his crime? Having a cloudy psychopath. No, but seriously, a psychopath is the mind-reading biometric system put in place by this utopian government. When your mental state reaches a certain threshold of not nice thoughts, you're immediately flagged by the city's AI as a latent criminal and then arrested by enforcers who are reformed criminals and sent off to therapy to get your mind right before being returned to society. Or do you? We'll come back to this later. Anyways, our man here walked past a drone who decided he looked a little under the weather, and our perp took this assessment as the end for him. His psychopath was cloudy, which meant he wouldn't be eligible to work or maintain his current living situation because apparently this too is dictated by your algorithmically decided mental health. Having determined that his life was over and he'd be hauled off to a padded cell forever, he takes it upon himself to first lose his virginity to something other than the government-approved sex simulators, and unfortunately for everyone involved, not consensually. He takes a young lady hostage and violates her quite violently. When he's finished, he gets interrupted by our team of officers. They point their gun at him, and the AI within the gun analyzes his threat level and adjusts itself to stun. This is our introduction to the Dominators, the sidearm of choice for law enforcement in Japan. It's a great note that the gun made the choice to set itself to stun, not the officer. However, the stun setting doesn't work due to some performance-enhancing drug.
Steroids or possibly SARMs or whatever.
The onboard AI then reevaluates him as so unwell that no amount of treatment could allow for him to return to society, and sentences him to death, which is kind of a harsh decision for a man on drugs. Oh, and I guess rape. His execution is scheduled to be carried out by the first officer to point their gun at him, but unfortunately, there's also a speaker on the gun, and now the rapist hears his death sentence on the loudspeakers. So naturally, he makes a break for it, but not before taking the girl with him. A standoff ensues and the man is shot, but no bullet hits him. Instead, a chain reaction ensues and his body is completely destroyed, blowing chunks of viscera and blood all over the poor girl, as though there wasn't enough of this man's DNA on her already. And as one might imagine, being raped, beaten, and held hostage, followed by having a human explode all over you, not in the fun way, has a kind of negative impact on her psyche. It's safe to say she's feeling a little blue. Detecting the shift in mood, and by extension, increasing crime coefficient, the AI term for probability of committing a crime, the computer on board the gun loudly announces that she's a criminal now too, and is sentenced to explode. In her, rightfully so, panic, the girl throws herself down a flight of steps to avoid being kersploded by the gun. She makes a run for it, but not before our protagonist Akane can step in the way of the other detective's shot, as she herself is of clear mind and cannot be shot by one of these guns. Remember that one for later. The other detectives heard the sentence passed on her by the gun and were ready to enforce the law. Without question or hesitation, they all knew the exact context of the situation. They knew this girl was a victim of a crime and was by rights not in a normal state of mind. Yet not one hesitated when the AI onboarded their weapon, and the very country itself sentenced her to death. An argument ensues between Akane and the enforcers, but she wears the pants in the situation, so ultimately it is her call. The enforcers are latent criminals, and despite being higher ranked when they were police officers, they are now ranked below a day one rookie due to their psychopath rating. Eventually, the team tracks her down, but not before our secondary protagonist, not Cowboy Bebop, Kogami, finds her first. The girl in this time has managed to douse herself in gasoline and is threatening to light herself on fire if the officers try to arrest her. In her mind, she thinks Kogami is willing to make her explode from the inside out, but not watch a cute anime waifu bonfire. Luckily for her, Akane comes in and demands that he lower his weapon, reminding him that she's the victim and we can't go victim blaming. It's not like she was walking around naked or anything. Or was she? This actually happened, by the way. Some people, our protagonist included, wear holograms instead of clothing. Their clothes are just holograms. But the moment before he can take the shot, Akane shoots him, paralyzing him instantly. As he's a latent criminal, the gun will always shoot him without need to authorize. Akane then walks up to the girl, who continues to threaten to set herself on fire, and Akane does her best to explain that trying to kill herself is the exact reason the gun thinks she's a criminal in the first place: destruction of government property. And eventually, the woman puts down the lighter, and when she does, the gun lowers the sentence from explode to coma, and Akane takes the shot, incapacitating the victim and then immediately arresting her. This is episode 1. In one episode, we learned everything we needed to know about this series, about the world and the people that live in it. Society has become a utopia, yes, but not for everyone. For some, they live in fear that someday soon, when they're walking down the street, one of the scanners might think they're feeling a little blue. This murky mental state makes them ineligible for work, to have relationships, to live in the same home. We see the grisly reality of instability that this breeds in the mentally infirm. And additionally, it authorizes government agents to hunt you down and drag you into therapy until you feel better. We also learn that the police are half criminals and half mindless automatons who blindly enforce the rules of an artificial intelligence system that they clearly don't really understand, and in so doing are able to commit gruesome, horrific murders that they call enforcement, but are in fact, at their core, just executions. But because they aren't the ones passing judgment on whether the perpetrators live or die, the Sybil AI is, they feel no regret or remorse about the things they do to people. Last but not least, we learn the people in this society have little to no real human interactions or intimacy. Most people are living their entire life virtually, entirely and don't even have sex anymore, likely because the desires and jealousies associated with meaningful relationships might cloud their hue and get them hauled off to therapy. This introduction paints the image of a clean, sterile society where all aspects of your life are predetermined and entirely out of your own control. A society where the vast majority exist in a state of peaceful isolation, where all their needs are met, but simultaneously are missing something crucial: the missing pieces. Over the course of the next few episodes, it's slowly revealed that Kogami is the former partner of lead detective Genoza, and that at some point in the past, their third mate was violently tortured and murdered, and his corpse put on display in a mall for weeks under a hologram. And when they failed to capture the culprit, Kogami's psychopath went dark, revealing his deep-seated desire for revenge. As it turns out, this isn't the only case of this happening. In fact, most of their enforcers / latent criminals are former police, who the state deemed corrupted or tainted by crime and are therefore unfit to return to society and are sentenced to clean up the shit that keeps slipping through the cracks or turn themselves in for sentencing. As a result, all of the detectives live in constant fear of their psychopaths getting cloudy from all the crimes and violence they are witness to, and being reduced themselves from detective to slave. It's even a plot point that Genoza constantly brings himself to therapy to avoid this very pitfall, and that this is the reason for his cold and disconnected interactions with the rest of the team. They are, though they don't like to admit it, afraid. Everyone, that is, except for Akane. She not only doesn't fear her hue going cloudy, it never changes. If anything, it only gets clearer. This is an important note for later. Even her friends point out how jealous they are that she is so mentally healthy, that nothing ever gets her down. She's always so cheery, regardless of what the world throws at her. Not to mention, she's apparently a genius who qualified with top marks in every category in college, qualifying her for literally every and any job of her choosing, due to both her psychopath's hue and her mental aptitude. She is one of the few people who are truly free to do anything in this society. Her friend admits that the only career she is fit for, according to Sybil, is janitor work, and she admits that she actually really likes it, and it makes her feel fulfilled in life. But that then begs a question: what if it didn't? What if scrubbing shit from toilets demeaned her as a person? Especially considering that robots exist in this world and are high functioning to the point that they run kiosks, are law enforcement officers, and operate pharmacies. I gotta admit, if the government told me they were firing all the robot maids in town so that I can clean toilets instead, I would feel pretty down in the dumps. You mean to tell me this is all I'm qualified for? There's not one robot that could clean this toilet for me? No, okay. Yeah, no. Yeah, no. That's totally okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it's fine. It's, you know what? I actually like cleaning toilets. It's funny you mentioned that. I was actually thinking pointing it at my head might get me in trouble. I'll probably cut that. This scene where Akane is talking to her friends establishes the fact that most people are placed in fields and industries that largely are ideal for them, and that for the most part, are completely satisfied with their work. But the roles they play are sometimes overwhelmingly menial, if not just blatantly degrading. But again, they are happy. Though they also show us another take on the working situation of the citizens, where one member of a software development team is ostracized and used as a venting instrument for the other employees. Not unlike the mystery barrel on board ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean back in the day. But instead of being able to release your tension in anonymous shame inside of the damp, bleachy mystery barrel, here it's done in plain sight. The restraint from sexual activity and from outward acts of aggression are vented in the form of hazing on a single man who was openly beaten and harassed by other members of his team in an effort to keep their own hues from growing cloudy. No one in the factory sees anything wrong with the situation, as a whipping boy is viewed as providing a service to the team, one that most likely the Sybil system itself had determined that he was ideal for, which implies that to an extent Sybil is able to detect masochism in its aptitude test, as everyone in this company seems entirely familiar with the concept of such a worker and situation. But that theory is put into question, as it is quite obvious that this whipping boy was the person programming the drones to murder the most frequent of his abusers. So maybe Sybil was right, and he did enjoy it to an extent. However, it was then a failure of the company not to move the worker around so as to avoid feelings of resentment towards any one particular person in general. I think of it like this. You could really enjoy being spit on. Maybe that's like your thing. And some people know this and come by and occasionally spit on your face and chest. They get to release some tension, and you get those healthy feelings of being demeaned. You thank them for their service and go about your day. But then one day you meet somebody who really likes spitting on people. Like, that's his thing. On the surface, it seems like a match made in heaven, right? Wrong. This guy comes up to spit on you in the worst times. You're trying to eat your food, you're taking a shit, you're calling your mother on the phone, and it starts to bother you that he's getting off on it. The fact that he is having fun at your expense and that he only spits on you, even though you know he would do it to anyone, makes it seem a little too personal for your liking. In fact, it takes away from your ability to enjoy being spit on. Now that you don't have this outlet, your life begins to spiral. You can't enjoy your job. You can't work anywhere else because this is literally the only company the government says you can work at. So what do? You can't stand this guy. You can't change jobs, and you can't bust anymore. The only real option is to hate your life forever or go to the funhouse. Hear me out. Or maybe, just maybe, you could say program one of these robots to think that the guy who's bothering you is a refrigerator in need of decommissioning. Now, I'm not saying I would, but I'm saying daddy needs to bust. And if you gotta die for that to happen, so be it. The show also gives us a more in-depth look at the virtual reality that the majority of the population spends all of their social hours within. But I'll skip over that as it doesn't add too much to the story, except to emphasize the lack of true human interactions, as most people have never and will never see the real faces of the people they know best. Akane herself doesn't even know one of the victims despite having known her for years back in high school. The fact that she could know a person for years and yet be unable to recognize or even empathize with her following her murder begs some questions about her own morality. This segment does achieve one thing definitively though, that being when we are introduced to our primary antagonist of the series, Makishima, the white-haired guy from the opening scene. As it turns out, he has been the mastermind behind almost every major murder spree and serial killing thus far in the series. He's even involved in some of the side characters' backstories. He provides people with the technology and information necessary to get away with murder within such a heavily monitored society. And while for the most part, he himself did not actively engage in these murders, he did manipulate a great number of people into committing heinous crimes, as well as supplying them with the tools to do so. So at very least, he is guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. It is eventually revealed that Makishima was also behind the murder of Kogumi's partner. This lit a fire into the team and put an increasing amount of pressure on the relationships between Akane, Genoza, and Kogumi, as Genoza becomes increasingly aware of his own rising crime coefficient and of Kogumi's willingness to go outside the law to get revenge for their friend's death. After a number of episodes of cat and mouse, the police track Makishima down to a hidden dungeon in the sewers beneath Tokyo, where he has lured Kogumi and Akane to be hunted for sport by this world's version of Elon Musk, who, as it turns out, is a cyborg, if not outright just a robot, with his consciousness uploaded to a cybernetic body. Eventually, Elon gets blasted, but not before he beats Kogumi half to death. And now all that's left is to follow Makishima down into what appears to be a dead end. And considering she's carrying the most ungodly hacks, missile launcher slash disintegrator slash stun gun, Akane runs into this supremely confident that she can save her friend, pick up Kogumi, and be home in time to pet her digital pussy. However, this is where things take a turn for the worse. As she points her dominator at Makishima, she is shocked to see his crime coefficient reads a healthy blue, roughly the same as hers, in the low 60s. She's confused, but Makishima goes straight into villain mode and begins giving her the endgame, "I am the villain" speech, declaring himself incapable of being judged by something so lowly as the Sybil system. But Akane is barely hearing him. She continues to point the gun desperately at him, waiting for his threat level to rise as he stands there, holding a hostage at gunpoint, but it only gets lower. To drive this point home about her hypocrisy and her notion of what makes her a good person, as she hides under the umbrella of the Sybil system, he throws her down his gun and tells her to pick it up, making clear his demands that if she wants to save her friend, she must be the one to take his life, not the dominator she hides behind. Instead, she, Akane, must kill him, but she refuses, claiming that she is not a murderer. She's a good person, ultimately failing to see the disconnect between the people who the Sybil system sentenced to death and the fact that it is still she who ultimately pulls the trigger and takes their lives. He gives her an ultimatum: shoot him with the shotgun now, or watch helplessly as he murders her friends before her very eyes, while she begs for mercy. This is a beautiful moment of humanity that Makishima has created. Akane must accept responsibility of taking taking a life. She cannot hide behind the law here. She must take a life to save a life. She picks up the gun, crying hopeless tears of desperation as she does so. She takes the gun in one hand, keeping the Dominator raised as though desperate for its approval. She levels the gun at Makishima and pulls the trigger. Once, twice. Slowly, the camera reveals that she missed horribly. Having never shot a real gun, she wasn't ready for the kickback. In the same way that she wasn't ready to accept the repercussions of taking a life by choice, neither was she ready for the actual act of firing the gun. It seems as though the implications of the scene is that because she wasn't willing to set aside the Sybil system, both literally and metaphorically, i.e. the Dominator, she wasn't able to properly aim the gun, and because of that, she wasn't able to save her friend. Makishima lowers his head and says that he was disappointed in her, as though he wishes she had shot him. Akane continues to point the Dominator at him worthlessly, and as it announces Makishima as a crime coefficient of 0, he slits the girl's throat. Akane can only scream as she is helpless to stop the man who the rules of her society have no effect on. He walks out the back door as Akane is left to wallow in her failures. Her partner is fighting for his life, and her best friend has been brutally murdered in front of her. This is where the story hits its true high mind strides, and while some of the philosophical quotes being thrown around put a little bit too much emphasis on the intellectual circle jerk that's been happening on screen, I think it manages to keep from going too far as to wander into the territory of corny pseudo-intellectualism. We finally then are shown the cracks in society, though not explicitly through exposition. Instead, we are given a single episode flashback on one of the enforcers. We see that she was a musician who played in an underground punk band, and one day, a scanner picked up that she'd been playing music illegally, and off she was hauled to a rehabilitation center where we see how all those who violate the law of happiness in this society are sent. She is locked in a white cell for 6 months, given antidepressants, and allowed limited access to basic items. When she expresses even the slightest dissatisfaction with her predicament, alarms go off and she is sedated, while a doctor announces that her stay will be extended. This is the fate of all those who don't fall into the prescribed categories that Sybil, the great AI in the sky, determined would be best for society when violators aren't executed outright, that is. The fate they have drawn is that of drugged compliance, being converted into a slave for law enforcement or confined until their mental health either falls below the critical threshold, at which point they can return to society, or rises high enough that they will then be executed. This flashback is juxtaposed with the reveal of the current reality of this society, where there is no crime. Violence is almost non-existent, and people feel so safe that they either don't lock their doors or don't have locks on their doors at all. This is the cost of their freedom, of their perfect society where 99.9% of the people's lives are fulfilled, a life free of conflict, of strife, of want, violence. This is the unseen cost, the forgotten people in mental institutions for having seemingly normal desires and lives. This truth about society being devoid of violence brought into dramatic realization when a man in a mask that prevents his psychopaths from being read savagely beats a woman to death in front of hundreds of onlookers. Most didn't even know what they were looking at. They couldn't even comprehend the violence that they were seeing and had no idea how to react when faced with it. This violent outburst culminates in a group of shut-ins who couldn't leave their house ever for fear that their psychopaths would get them hauled off to prison or executed, rising up in masks of their own and lashing out at the society that had forgotten them. All of this, however, is happening simply as a means to an end. Makishima manipulated them into this uprising so that he could distract the police in order to gain access to the Sybil mainframe and destroy the server that housed the program that governed their society. In one fell swoop, he would free everyone from its guidance. But at the last possible moment, the chief of police comes in and executes the would-be revolutionaries. The fringe elements must be pruned. That is the reality of the Sybil system. Ultimately, it is revealed to the viewer, but not the characters, that this society is governed by an AI that isn't quite so artificial. In actuality, it is the product of hundreds of minds, just like Makishima, interconnected in some sort of organic motherboard. People who are sociopaths, people who are incapable of being judged by the Sybil system, people who no matter what happened to them or the people around them, their mental states and capacities would go unhindered. Now, in writing this review, it has come to my attention that some critics, most in fact, were less than impressed with the reveal of the Sybil system, that it was underwhelming and one of the most disappointing reveals in anime history. And while I would give that to Jiren from Dragon Ball Super and his backstory, I offer a different view. Now to me, the reveal of the hive mind felt really familiar, though at first I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then I realized it's the Wizard of Oz. In case you're unfamiliar, allow me to explain. In the Wizard of Oz, we are presented with a society wherein all appears to be magical and beautiful, where all the people have grown reliant upon a single figure who can solve all of their problems, who they believe in blindly. All the while, there is discontent bubbling beneath the surface. I'm skipping a lot here, but eventually, each of the protagonists sees the wizard, and each sees something different. The Tin Man sees a frightening beast, the Scarecrow, a beautiful lady, the Cowardly Lion, a ball of fire, and Dorothy sees a floating head. They must all then perform a task in order to get what they want. They defeat the witch and return to see the wizard. However, it is revealed that the wizard is not in fact an all-powerful man capable of solving any problem. He's just an old con man with a wide breadth of knowledge about the human psyche. In this same manner is the corruption of the Sibyl system revealed to our protagonist. Shusei Kagari sees a frightening beast and is murdered. Genoza sees the chief as a beautiful lady. Kogami sees the ball of fire, and Akane sees the floating head, the brains in a jar. Maybe this isn't an exact parallel, but an influence is hardly ever direct copy. But even so, and the continually hammered idea of the infallibility and reliance on the Sibyl system, I entirely expected a sort of Wizard of Oz type deal, where the all-powerful AI was something slightly less than what we'd been led to believe. I thought it was an expected twist, to an extent, though certainly a bizarre and slightly underwhelming one, considering just how telegraphed it was to me. But whether you love it or hate it, this reveal is what drives a story into the endgame, and that's where the story really hits its stride. The endgame. This is the endgame. It is revealed that all is a lie. The society that people allowed to form because it was fair and devoid of human influence turned out to be the byproduct of hundreds of sociopathic brains joined together to create a neural network. The system was one that could judge any and all impartially, for the most part, unless it saw something that could benefit itself, regardless of the cost to others. It isn't blatantly stated whether this is good or bad, simply that it is a violation of every human under it, because they were misled. But even so, is it really that bad? That a hive mind of human geniuses are able to create a perfect world, and all they had to do was lie to everyone and say that the decisions were made by a computer? Is it really that bad? On the other hand, without them, the people would by and large be living unfulfilled lives full of need, pain, violence, and despair, but they would be free to make decisions of their own nonetheless. For me, it was plain to see from the beginning that this anime was meant to ask a lot of questions about humanity and morality, but by the end, wasn't just asking if the society was fair, it was showing me both sides are inherently unfair. One society, proposed by the villain, Makishima, is the one we live in now, where violence, crime, and disparity are all products of the same thing, freedom. But you have a choice. The protagonists are on the side of peace and conformity at cost of the things that make us human. Kogami, in this equation, seems to represent the human element in this conflict. He is just a man that follows the rules as they are laid out. Mostly. But when things go too far beyond his own internalized compass of right and wrong, he will take a stand. In truth, his character is a bit more complex, but if I had to analyze every character in the story, we'd be here all day. And this video is long enough. Ultimately, he doesn't care about the ideological struggle taking place. In fact, he isn't even aware of its presence. He doesn't know what's really happening in this world. He's a man on a warpath for revenge, and in the process, sure, he's saving millions of lives and condemning people to live a life of quiet desperation, but that's not his motivation. It's just to do right by a friend that he had failed to save years ago. In the end, Kogami gets his revenge, and inadvertently thwarts Makishima's plans, but given the stakes of the situation, it's really more of a mercy killing than anything. Makishima's only ambition has failed, and his will is seemingly broken. He couldn't bring down Sibyl. He couldn't light a spark of chaos that would in turn burn the society that he hated to the ground, and he could not even be held accountable for its crimes, as he himself believes that his death would be justice, and he doesn't believe himself to be any more special than the average man. Even if he was taken in, he would be forcibly added to Sibyl's collection of brains, making the system that much stronger, and leaving both he and his mind intact. That wouldn't be justice to him or any person or party in the series. In the end, we don't get an answer from the show. There is no clear right or wrong. Society carries on as though nothing happened because from their perspective, nothing did. Their world wasn't turned upside down. They didn't find out that their government is a lie. They didn't realize that for most people in this society, life is great, but for the abnormal person, it's a life of fear, of slavery, of death, all of which are truly necessary to keep the lights running and the wheels turning. And so it does. In the end, we're left with an episode much like the first. Except now the lead detective has been demoted to enforcer, just like Kogami before him. There's another new, young face getting thrown into choppy water. But this time, it's Akane giving her the rookie treatment. And we, the audience, are left to ponder. Is this better? Is it better for the world to just keep plodding along in this cycle? Was Makishima right the whole time? Would it really have been better to set people free and let them have the choice of a dangerous freedom? Psycho-Pass doesn't offer you the answer to that question, and neither will I. And that's why I love this show so much. It's truly a remarkable piece of work. It's by no means perfect, but if you want to sit down and watch a great piece of art and be entertained, at present, this just might be at the top of my list. No, of course, it's not dethroning my true favorite anime, but in terms of best anime stories I've ever seen, this is up there with the best. Just don't watch season 2. It doesn't count in my mind, and hopefully not in yours either. But anyways, that's all I've got for today. If this video is received well, maybe I'll do a character analysis for some of the characters individually. But for now, my name is Tendo, and I am out of here.